Good morning, students. Today we're just going to have a look at the section 3 composing, particularly as it relates to persuasive and interpretive writing. Before we get started, I want to direct you to the Connect page. So if you go to the Content tab, here you can see the Persuasive tab here, open that, and in here you'll find all the resources that I'll be discussing in this lecture. One that you will need handy is the one that we handed to you on Friday, which is the Persuasive Prompts and Good Answers. So have that handy, or have a hard copy of that. And it looks like this, the one with the questions on it. So just have that ready to go, because I'll be referring to this part here in particular in the first few slides. So I'll quickly go back to this PowerPoint and make it full screen. So what we are going to look at today is you're going to just review some persuasive technique vocab. Then we're going to look at the aims of what we're trying to do when we write persuasively or in writing an interpretive text. Following on from that, we're going to look at audience profiles and review just what is meant by values and attitudes, because it's important to know your audience's values and attitudes in order to appeal to their values and attitudes. And then finally, you're just going to write for a particular audience. These are necessary because often where people fall down in the persuasive section is that they don't have an audience or an idea in mind and have a clear purpose. If you don't have a clear audience in mind, it often leads to responses that are getting the 50 to 55%. So if we have that clear audience in mind and understand their values, we can better target our persuasive techniques to suit those needs. There will just be a lot of me pausing the video or asking you to pause the video as we go through, so just listen out for that. So just to start us off with, I want you to think about these quiz questions. So after I put them up on the board, up on here, I want you maybe just to pause the video and then think about responses to them. Okay, so if you pause the video now, have a look at some of them and go, hey, can I confidently explain what the difference is between logos, ethos, and pathos? Okay, so none of that should have been new to you. I suppose maybe euphemism and metonymy or metonym might be something new, but all these other ones are terms that you would have encountered over the course of your schooling from year 7 onwards when you would have looked at persuasive writing for the NAPLAN. Now, if we look at the answers, we'll see logos is just appealing to that sense of logic. Okay, we often do that through statistics and facts. Ethos is just that sense of credibility and authority by using expert opinions, and then pathos is one we're perhaps most comfortable with. You know, the appeal to people's emotions. If you think back to that Whack a Flock of Flame article, you know that definitely used pathos in the form of using that guilt by having that cute little dog there, as well as, you know, juxtaposed against the brute rapper. And the next one, if we look at, we're looking at is hyperbole. Okay, I'm not going to go through these each individually, but you know, values and attitudes are something we bring up a lot in this course and will regularly be referred to. The last one I want to focus on is just interpretive. Now, some of you would have looked at interpretive text before. We probably are aware that they are persuasive light. So the purpose of an interpretive isn't necessarily to persuade, it's normally just to interpret an event, idea, place, person, whatever it may be. And it includes many forms, so an autobiography or a biography is an interpretive text, but it can also be a feature article. The danger of writing an interpretive text is to make sure and ensure that you're not writing with the sole purpose to persuade, but more so just to explain and interpret an idea, event, person. It does incorporate persuasive techniques, however, like I said, it's persuasive light. And then the last two are euphemism and metonymy or metonyms. Just something I threw in there because I thought you might incorporate it somehow. What we are looking at today is just to make sure we understand the differences between persuasive and interpretive text and really be able to define and use that persuasive language to appeal to the audience's values and emotions in order to convince. Often people don't have an audience in mind, therefore they don't select the best techniques or rhetorical devices in order to create that connection between the narrator, the figure, or whoever it is, and the audience. We're going to look at the persuasive, the form of open letter, which can be persuasive and or interpretive, more interpretive, and then we're just going to see how we can apply this to our composing task for Friday. You'll notice that this slide was something I've used in the past that says week 5 composing, but ignore that. So persuasive text, we know the purpose is to put forth an argument in order to persuade the reader, viewer, or listener. And, you know, we are probably most used to the forms of things such as feature articles, speech, letters can be persuasive, blog post discussions, anything like that. And an essay is a persuasive text if you think about it, everything we read is persuasive. Even a textbook is persuasive because it's accepting a particular position or stance of the creator. Now, what I'd recommend is having a look at those good answer sheet for the text type overview. This is the one I brought up just before, so I'll bring it up again now. Not that one there. This one here. So you can see the different text types. We do have the interpretive, persuasive, and imaginative for those who do prefer narrative, and you'll see that the language features are very much the same. We do expect to find these things in narrative as we would to find in interpretive, so it is just good to go through and think about what the purpose is, your audience, and then the forms that you could possibly use, as well as the language features. But like I said, the language features here are going to be very similar for imaginative, persuasive, or interpretive. If I quickly go back to the slide and wait for that bell. There's some things on Connect about the language of persuasion. I don't want to do too much in terms of looking at that because I feel we've done persuasive techniques to death in year 7 through to year 10 because it is such a priority in the school, but also just in NAPLAN. But most of us should know the persuasive techniques or the language of persuasion. But what I said is I wanted to focus on audience. So what we need to be mindful of when we are planning our persuasive and or interpretive is who your audience are. So you need to consider things such as the context, so age, gender, class, and interests, because this will determine your argument and the approach you take. Now, what I want you to consider is how we can better address the needs of your audience. Okay, we're not going to persuade if we're going to present a contrasting argument that is presenting some opposition or conflict. So what we want to ask ourselves is, why should they care about what you are saying and how does it relate to them? So this is all important information to consider in the planning phases of your work, of your writing. So you need to make sure that you have that clear audience in mind because it will dictate many of the language choices that you're going to make in your response. If you're appealing to a group of environmentalists, we are expecting more scientific jargon and diction, intellectual diction, because that's how you're going to persuade. A conversational tone and style isn't going to appeal to a group of bureaucrats or a group of aristocrats. However, a conversational style might work for a political campaign where you are trying to deal and talk to a group of voters. So just keep that in mind. But what I've got on the next page is just a bit of an activity, is how we can write to a specific audience. So this is something I want you to do with your groups, or even tonight or today, is just consider the values that these people hold. So you look over here on the audience profile. On the left, you've got the audience that we're looking at, and on the right, the values. So I just want you to pause the video for a moment and just consider, what are the values of these people on the left? Okay, I've already done the first two for you just to get you started, but just consider what those values are. Pause the video now. Okay, hopefully you found that quite easy. Again, just really reiterating that point, you need to know your audience's values and attitudes. So if we move to the next activity, this is a bit more complex and just requires you to think a bit better, but on the left hand side you've got an issue. So what we want you to consider is, if you are saying something, you need to have an issue and have a stance on an issue. It's always good, and you'll notice in the good answers, some of the people have quite a lot of knowledge about the issues, so I do recommend that you research an issue or be passionate about something so that you can present an argument, particularly if it's persuasive text, on a particular issue. And issues that are relevant and contemporary, or relevant simply to you, are the best ones to go with. So remember about the idea of writing what you know. However, I would veer away from things such as sustainability, uniforms, those sorts of ones that end up reading like NAPLAN persuasive text from year 9s. So just a word of warning there. Here we go over there, a proposed tax on fast food. You can see the audience. If it's an audience of adults, they're going to be against. It's because the focus then is on the family budget. You look at the teenagers, against. You're a teen who doesn't earn money, so obviously a proposed tax on fast food is going to limit you. And then the teachers, well, they're going to be against because this idea, perhaps, that they want to spend that time, but that's obviously a resistant approach. But again, it's completely up to you how you determine that. and how you're going to appeal to each different audience, or if you're appealing to one audience. What I want you to consider is how those same audiences would respond to the following three: a proposal to limit fossil fuel, a proposal to introduce mandatory education on sexism, and a proposal that all high school students participate in mandatory community service. So maybe choose one of the audiences, whether it be parents, teenagers, or teachers, and just consider how each would respond to those different issues. So good opportunity now just to stop and reflect, okay? How would they respond? Because you need to know your audience before you can write to persuade your audience. So pausing the video again. I trust you didn't find that too difficult to do. So what you want to be doing now, once you've considered that, is then go forth when you're writing persuasive text and interpretive text to have some issues and topics in mind. I had a student last year who used to write convincingly about the mining tax. Yes, it became a bit repetitive for me to read as a marker, but he was able to develop his response and get stronger and stronger because it sounded credible. He actually knew something about it and wrote convincingly, so he was then able to have a sustained voice. So what I want you to consider is, what are you passionate about? And just think about, okay, gathering some information about that, because obviously, statistics is something that's important that can, obviously enhance your response, for example, but I'm not saying it's the only way to go. I just think it's a good idea to have a topic in mind. Now, when you are researching, I do think it's important just for you to consider, okay, what, who, when, where, why, how, the 5 W's and a H, to really frame that research, so know something about your topic. I've just put a model of that on Connect. So if you go to Connect, you'll see how I've model research notes, and this takes you bugger all. Find something that you're passionate about and just write some notes. Violence in Perth schools, this is one that I did with my students last year. Okay, it just gives me that background contextual knowledge, so that you're just not starting with nothing, which I think can really limit your responses in an exam situation. So be passionate about something, find some information so you don't look like an idiot, and just writing vague generalizations about the topic. The last thing I want to look at is the open letter format. Open letter is typically just addressed to a particular person or group of people, intended for publication in a newsletter or newspaper or journal. They do still use them today. You can open up a newspaper and typically find one in there. There normally is an explicit audience, so the audience is then clear, or the audience is implied, so it might be to Pauline Hanson, which is the example we're going to look at, or it could be, to the people of Australia, which I'd always recommend against because it's too broad. You can't appeal to everyone's values if you're saying simply to everyone in Australia, so just keep that in mind. The purpose is typically to persuade and convince or interpret. So an open letter for me is more of an interpretive piece, but I like it because I think this is something that would really appeal. The language, okay, it normally uses an informal register, meaning quite colloquial. However, just because it's colloquial doesn't mean it's persuasive. Sometimes the most persuasive pieces are those that are colloquial. So if we look here, the open letter structure is quite basic. Starts as with a common salutation, Dear Pauline Hanson, and ends with the same, Sincerely a Concerned Australian. So a short overview and explanation, and then it goes through, okay, expand on those original ideas as you would any persuasive piece. But again, you're trying to endear yourself. You're not trying to be accusatory or controversial and inflammatory towards Pauline Hanson. You're trying to ensure that you build that relationship and recognizing her values and attitudes and where your values and attitudes aligns with her, in order to make that persuasive connection, that connection that will allow for some persuasion. Because remember, you're not trying to put people into their outer, you're not trying to alienate your audience, you're trying to in fact get them on your side, so that, for example, Pauline Hanson will act on something, so there's an example here, but there's also some models on Connect. So if you look, and I'll just flick through, again, it's this one here, which I had up before. You'll notice that there are some examples on Connect. The first one is obviously a bit long, and it's taken straight from a waste paper, or a sample exam. It's a really good example though, and the student clearly knows something about the cricket scandal. The other three, here's another one that really just controls language quite well. It also has experiments with form by using that letter inside the original blog post. The second last one is that Hanson letter, done by a student at this school from last year. Really quite clear. Don't need a statement of intent, but I'd recommend reading over this one as it's quite well done. And then there's one more, which is looking at Trump And I think this student was a very strong student and does some wonderful things with the quote and with the techniques of persuasion. So I'd recommend reading those examples, annotate, and kind of determine what makes a successful answer. Good luck.